I always have a couple people who say, I can't come. Are you going to record this? So I am recording. So I'm Louise Larson. I'm an independent educational consultant, and I started doing these monthly seminars in September because I did some presentations over the summer and I thought they were really enjoyable. So I thought, you know what, I can just do this on my own. So I wanted to talk about the nuts and bolts of application plans and what goes on with them and what they all mean and who should use which ones. And I wanted to just open this up by talking about stress. And I also teach high school, and I see an extensive amount of stress in my classrooms among seniors. And I had a senior this year. I've been working with her since she was in 9th grade. She's a wonderful student. And she applied early action to several schools. And about 10 days ago, she was admitted to Penn State. And when I finally talked to her about this, she told me when she got her acceptance, she cried for 10 minutes. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is, this kid should not be that stressed. And so the other story I want to relay when we talk about stress is I met with a junior last week. I had a virtual meeting with her, and she has a very strong high school curriculum, very strong rigor, very strong grades, a lot of neat stuff going on. So as I was kind of reviewing where she is, I asked her if she'd done any testing, and it was a virtual meeting, but yeah, I could see just tears pouring down her face saying, I've tested already. My scores are nowhere near my GPA. I don't know what to do. And I thought, my goodness, what are we doing to these kids? So as we progress through this, I want to just say, if you have a high school student in your life, maybe they aren't wearing the stress to you, but I certainly see it from where I sit. So above all, be gentle with, and I'm sure you're stressed too as parents. This is a stressful process, but I say that to say, just to be mindful of tone and body language, because these kids really, it's a very stressful place to be. So when you talk about the nuts and bolts of an application and what it might look like, when are you applying? What plan are you applying on? So what I wanted to do was I was going to ask my participants tonight to have paper and pencil to write this down, because if you write it down, it will imprint on your brain a little bit more than if I just gave you a PDF. And I thought about making a PDF, but then I thought, you know what? No. So writing these down will help sort it out. So I'm going to introduce what the different application plans are, and then talk about who might use which plans. So the first application plan that you might hear about is rolling. And rolling applications are exactly what they sound like. You're going to send in your application, and 2 to 4 weeks later, they're going to send you an answer. There's not so much of a deadline, and they're not going to batch their answers. They're not going to say, we will be sending our answers March 1st. No, you will get your answer in real time as they make it. So a couple of things that have happened with rolling admissions. A couple of years back, the Department of Justice brought an antitrust case against the college admissions planning world about certain things around deadlines and stuff like that. So some of the rules, not rules, but the adhered to just community timelines, they are no longer enforced. So when the Department of Justice brought this antitrust case, what happened was colleges were allowed to open up their testing and their application plans much earlier. So there's a lot of, not a lot, but I should say, like Southern public schools start taking applications in July and August. And the thing about that is, if you go to your Northeastern, I'm in New Jersey, if you go to a Northeastern guidance counselor in July and say, hey, we're ready to submit our applications, they're going to go, I don't know what you're talking about. But a lot of those Southern high schools do open like the second week in August. So the rolling deadlines have opened up much sooner than they used to be. an example would be, these would be like Montana State. I ran into a parent in August. It was August in New Jersey, and this kid had been admitted to Montana State. And that's great. I mean, that's a wonderful thing. So rolling is the first plan. The next plan would be regular decision. Regular decision is typically January 1st through, say, February 1st. There's a couple of schools that are a little later, a couple of schools that are a little earlier too. Rutgers is December 1, the University of California system's November 30th. So that is the regular decision, and that will generally be a batched set of answers where they will say, you know, we will do it the first week in March. Everything, they will give you everything from a range to a specific, at 12 o'clock on Saturday, this day, we will be releasing our decisions. So that's regular decision. Probably if you went to college, that's what you did. The next plan is early action. Now, early action is an opportunity to submit an application a little earlier than regular decision, typically anywhere from October 15th through like November 15th. Typically those deadlines are like October 15th, November 1, November 15th, even a couple of December 1st you might have. You will get those answers typically in a batch. They will answer you anytime from Thanksgiving to say the end of January, depending upon when they're going to release those. That is a great way to get an early read on your applications. The next type of plan are the early decision plans. Early decision, as opposed to early action, early decision are binding plans. If you apply to one school early decision and they accept you, you are committed to go there. So you can only apply to one school. So there's ED1, and ED1 tends to be around, say, November 1st deadline. Occasionally there's some November 15th and some December 1st deadlines. You get an increased likelihood of admission. You typically get that answer in the first half of December, typically. In the same vein of ED1, there's also early decision 2. So early decision 2, you can submit one, if you haven't already been admitted to a binding school, you can apply to another school with a binding application. Usually just January 1st or January 15th are those deadlines. You typically get an answer in late February if you've been admitted. So there's ED1, ED2. I just have to mention that dear sweet Colgate University in Hamilton, New York actually has an ED3 where by March 1st, you can take your regular decision application and convert to ED, and they'll tell you quite soon if you've gotten in. And then the other round of, in the college admissions world, they sometimes call the wait list like ED3 or 4, because on the wait list, they will tell you, okay, we are going to admit you. We will admit you if you commit to coming. So there's that little piece of, I just had to throw that in there. The wait list is a whole nother conversation that I'll do a wait list seminar in the spring for sure. Okay, so then after you had rolling, regular, early action, early decision, then we go to restricted early action. Now, restricted early action is where you apply to a college. Examples of this would be like Georgetown or Notre Dame, where you can apply early action to that school, but you may not apply anywhere else binding. So you can apply to any college you want that is not binding, but you can only apply to that school early action if you haven't made a binding application anywhere else. You don't have to tell them if you're coming till May 1st. So it's a little more flexible than early decision. The last application plan is single choice early action. Often you'll see that written down as SCEA. And schools with early single choice early action would be Yale and Princeton. The difference between REA, restrictive early action, like Georgetown, Notre Dame, and single choice is you can't apply to any other college's early action if you are in a single choice early application pool. You can apply to public schools that are non-binding. You can apply to service academies, and you can apply to rolling schools, but you can't apply like single choice early action to Yale and early action to Villanova. So you can't do that. And then the other thing to just keep an eye on, and I find that people don't know enough about this, is a lot of schools have a priority deadline. And a lot of people say, oh, what's that? Priority deadline tends to be around money. So a lot of schools will say we need it in by, I think Clemson this year, where their priority deadline was 11/1. Boston College's was 12/1. No, maybe Clemson was 12/1, Boston College was 11/1. Anyway, the point is priority tends to be around scholarship opportunities. And if you want to get be considered under pretty generous scholarship options, you want to get those in. A lot of people say to me, where can I get scholarships? The biggest, best money you're going to get for scholarship money is from the institution itself, leveraging their institutional funds to try and bring in their class. Running around trying to get, the Rotary or these scholarships, hey, that's great too. I'm not saying that's, hey, any money is great, but the school's funds are often going to be the most meaningful that will come across your desktop. So those are the plans. Before I go into who might want to take advantage of certain plans and who might want to avoid certain plans, are there any questions about those? Anything anybody want to ask? Just jump in and say, hey, what did that mean again? Anybody want to ask anything? Okay. And you know what? If you don't feel like speaking up, you can always go to the chat. Okay. Okay, so there's all these different ways to apply to college. Who should take advantage of what? Now, the rolling plans are really great. And when I think about that student that cried for 10 minutes when they got into Penn State, or the student who had just tears streaming down her face because her SAT scores weren't great, I think about kids like that, where getting an enrolling application, getting a yes, why not? And these schools tend to be a little less selective. They tend to be good for any type of student, that you don't have to be, the top of your class to be considering a rolling plan. If your child is stressed, finding a rolling plan, even if you're kind of like, they're never going to go to this college, but just get the yes. I will relay a story, and this, it's hard to know the stress our kids are carrying exactly. And years ago, my oldest child applied to the University of Maine early action, and in the third week in like October, this little package arrived from the University of Maine, and I put it on the counter, and I thought it was something confirming his application or something like that. And I will never forget, he appeared in front of me, his eyes were spinning, and he said, I was admitted to college. I got into college. And, this wasn't a kid that appeared to be carrying a lot of stress. The relief was palpable. I mean, he was just like, I got into college. He couldn't believe it. So the rolling plan, even if you kind of go, oh, I don't really want my kid going to that school, I think it's a win-win. Getting that yes and just saying, all right, that pop the bubble, pop that, like kind of like lancing a boil, like, okay, you're going somewhere. So I'm a fan of figuring out if rolling, if there's a rolling school for you. So early action, I'm a fan of early action for solid performers. If you have had a pretty consistent high school academic trajectory with rigor and performance, I'm all for an early action plan. If your testing is set and you're in good shape with that, or you're just not testing, by all means, send those early action applications in. You don't get any leverage with early action, really. You don't get an edge like you might with early decision, but I think that it's a great way to get an early read. If you have any college on your list that offers early action, I would pursue that plan, because if you're applying to 8 to 10 colleges and 4 to 6 have early action, send it in early action. See It's a great way to get an early read. And if the answers are coming back pretty positive, great. And if you get some answers back and you're like, whoa, I'm not getting the answers I wanted here, you have time to get some of those answers before Christmas to still meet. If you feel like you need to expand your applications a little bit, maybe cast a wider net, you still have time to get those regular decision applications in January. So I'm a fan of early action. Where you need to be careful and where early action might not make sense is you've got to do a little homework and figure out what the decision options are for early action at specific schools. And decision options would be admit, defer, deny. There are colleges that guarantee admit, defer for early action. So you know you can't get denied in the early action round. There are some colleges that guarantee that. There are some colleges that are admit, defer, or deny. So you could get denied in the early round. If you are rehabilitating a weak start in high school, if you are hoping that a late round of SAT testing puts you maybe in a different tier, and you have an early action school that would deny you, potentially, you might want to wait. You might want to just wait and see. Hold on, let me just, maybe I'll apply regular decision and get that first semester of grades in, and maybe the December SAT. So if you didn't have the strongest start, you might want to pump the brakes and just double check, could I be denied? And you might wonder, how am I going to figure out if I can be denied? Some schools have this laid out on their websites, exactly how it's going to go with the notification date, the notification options. Some don't. Call them and ask them. They get the name of your regional dean, send them an email and say, hey, the student should do this, by the way, not the parent. Thinking about applying early action, what are your application outcomes? So that's important. Early decision is you get to pick one school. Now, if you've had a pretty strong high school performance and you're not trying to rehabilitate a weak start, and you really have a clear first choice, and you really want that advantage, and you do not care about money, you've run the net price calculators at these schools, and last month I talked about financial aid and funding, so if you were here, you know what I'm talking about. If you run the net price calculators, by all means, applying to that one school could be a great option for you. Again, you might want to figure out if it's admit, defer, deny. Some schools, I think Vanderbilt in the early decision round I think they're admit, deny. One of those schools is admit, deny. So you're going to get an answer from Vanderbilt, and you're either going to, like it or hate it. But I don't think that's terrible, because I've seen kids get deferred in the early decision round, waitlisted in the spring, and then invited onto a priority summer wait list. It's just make a decision for this poor kid who really wants to come there and give them an answer. So these schools, these ED schools with ED1 tend to be quite selective. They tend to be CSS profile schools. So it's very hard to qualify for need at these schools. They tend to be very selective and very expensive. If you generate need, or you are comfortable paying $80,000 a year, that's fine. If you're somewhere in the middle of that, and you've gone under the net price calculator and you don't generate need there, and you apply binding early decision, you're going to be expected to go there. The only way you might have a leg to stand on with that is if you had a dramatic change in your circumstances. So with ED1, I'll walk through ED2, and then I'll talk a little bit about what students are facing in these plans. So ED1 will give you your answer in December, and then there's the ED2 option in January. Now, the ED2 option came to the table a couple of years ago, not a couple of years ago, I would try to say 20 years ago. And there are no Ivy League schools in the ED2 round. And I think what happened was all these other colleges like Villanova and Lehigh and Boston College and all these other schools said, hey, all these kids that didn't get into the Ivies, we'll give them a second chance to come here binding. And it'll be good for them, it'll be good for us, and we'll scoop up a whole bunch of kids that didn't get into Brown or Penn, and they'll come here. And so the ED2 round still tends to be very selective schools, gives the schools a chance to capture a strong cohort of full pay, often full pay students. If you are looking at ED1 and ED2 and wondering, is one better than the other? I would say that ED1 probably has more of an edge. And that's because they have not seen their regular decision pool yet. So ED1, they're going to be going, okay, you know, we want to get some good kids in here. ED2, they will be taking in those applications as they take their regular decision applications in. So they might have this bumper crop regular decision pool, and they're like, nah, we don't need these ED2 kids. You know, look at this. We never had an application pool like this, or vice versa. Like our regular decision pool isn't what we were hoping. Let's take some of these ED2 kids. But if you're sitting here wondering which one is going to give you more of an edge, I would say it's probably ED1. Now, a couple things about ED1. That's where all the athletes are going. So you might see a school that admits, you know, half their ED1 applicant pool, but most recruited athletes at those schools are going to be expected to apply early decision. So there's a little bit of a, you know, you have to just look at those numbers in context. The other piece of the puzzle is how strong these applicant pools tend to be. To apply ED1 November 1st, you've really got to have your stuff together. You got to probably have your testing done. You're kind of got it all going on. So I say that there was something else I was going to say about ED1. I forget. So let's just talk a little bit about the ED pool and some important context around it. And I pulled all sorts of numbers together, and I was just going to show you how many of these schools are taking 50 to 70% of their freshman class from the ED pool. I mean, 50 to 70%. So when you look at that, that makes actually getting into these schools regular decision, like, you know, you can't, I mean, the best one that I ever heard, and they took the data down, which makes me think that they were a little, you know, they didn't want that data out there, but sweet little Colby College in Maine was admitting 60% of their early decision pool and 6% in the regular decision pool. So then they could go out in the world and be like, our regular decision admit rate is 6%. That sounds very selective, but they're taking 60% of the kids that applied ED, and they're taking more than half the class. So, you know, so it's a bit of a game, and the colleges are using it to make themselves appear more selective. So, you know, if you look at a school like Middlebury, they take 47% of the kids that apply early decision, and they fill their class 65%. The class is 65% filled in the regular decision round. A big school, city school like Boston University takes a third of the kids that applied ED, 57% of the class is filled. The Claremont schools in California take between 50 and 70% of their classes ED. Holy Cross admits 76% of the early decision applicants, and they fill the class 56%. In the Midwest, Washington University of St. Louis takes 34% that apply ED. They fill the class 60%. Colgate, which has 3 rounds of ED, takes 62% of the class in the early round. NYU, 28% admit rate in the ED round. They fill the class 58%. Skidmore, 60% ED, 57% of the class is filled. So I pulled colleges. Emory, 27% admit rate, 60% of the class is filled. These are schools all over the country, large and small, cities and country. And you know, if you've ever been to a college admission, to a college visit in an admissions office, you know, these colleges are big business. So when you are in the early decision round, you get an edge for sure. And you have to be aware that when you look at those schools, how tough the regular decision round is. So if you look at the REA, the restrictive early action schools and the single choice early action schools, you definitely do get a little bit of an edge there. Get some, not quite what you get with the early decision. Those schools at least allow you to see the money you might get. If you apply binding early decision, you don't get a chance to see who else might have tried to recruit you with their institutional funds. So a typical trajectory for early decision kids might be somebody applies ED1 to Dartmouth, they're denied. Then they are applied ED2 to Middlebury, maybe they get in. If they don't get in, they call Colgate and say, I want to come on March 1st. So that's how kids might gain the ED plan. If you feel like hearing all this, your head is kind of spinning. When you come up to a specific school question, every college has a regional representative for wherever you live. And sometimes these are very clearly advertised on their admissions page. Sometimes you have to dig for it. Sometimes it's not there. If it's not there, call the admissions office, the student. Ask, I'm in Pennsylvania, I'm in Maine, I'm in New Jersey. Who should I contact? They will have that information for you. Once in a while, it might be like, you can email anybody in the admissions office. Occasionally at a small school like, you know, Vassar, for example. I don't even know if that's the case, but that's the type of school, like a smaller school that's doing a holistic read on applications. But I would suggest that you email them if you have a very specific question. Do you deny in the early action round? How does this work? If you have a very specific question, I would email them for 2 reasons. First of all, you'll have it in writing. If it turns out to not be true, you'll have it in writing. The other thing is, in an admissions office, you often have a lot of student workers, and you don't want to have just a well-meaning student give you information that isn't correct, and then act on that information and then find out you missed a deadline or something wasn't as you thought. So having it in writing from your regional dean is good. You want it from an adult, not a student. I had a very hard time this year. I still don't know if I have the answer. I had several students want to know Villanova has ED1, ED2, and early action. And this kid wanted to know, could he apply early action and convert it to ED in December? But their website says you can apply, if you are deferred in the early action, you can defer to ED2. And we were trying to figure out, could he convert it in December? And it was very hard to get an answer. And I still don't even think we really got one. I called MIT one time to get some information, and it became very apparent that I was talking to a student who, you know, meant very well, but didn't have the information I needed. So it's good to get it in writing. So if you're listening to all this and going, how am I going to figure this out, is when you really have a question, always go to the admissions office. Are there, you know, that I didn't want this to go too much, you know, I wanted to talk for about 30 or 40 minutes. Any specific questions about this, about how to proceed, about how to get information, any specific college questions anybody wants to ask? Just jump in if somebody wants to. No?
I have a question, Louise.
Yeah.
when you said the early decisions of the ED1s, and you said majority of athletes are doing that, they're required to do early decision if they're already being recruited by a school, any school, correct?
I think that there's a general agreement. I mean, required is maybe too strong a word, but it's going to be expected that if you are a formal recruit, that you are going to, if the school offers an early decision plan, you're going to apply early decision.
Okay.
One of the questions people often ask is, what happens if you break a binding early decision agreement? Truthfully, there's really not, they can't really make anybody come to a college. If they were to find that you had really gamed the system somehow and maybe applied ED1 to 2 schools, you would run the risk of having other acceptances rescinded. When you apply binding early decision, you generally sign an agreement with the college and with your school, and your high school could say, we are only sending your transcript to that school that admitted you. They have that. The fallout would probably be more for the high school's relationship with the college if you broke an ED agreement. So sometimes people ask, well, what can they really do to me? Well, there could be some consequences, but they can't make you come to the college. So that is one of the questions that sometimes people ask me. Any other questions people want to ask? All right.
Do you think that, I have a question, another question. Do you
Yeah.
think that when you don't have the early decisions and you're going regular admission, because you're putting out there all these data and statistics on, they're accepting 67% of their class or whatever. And so when, whoever was, you said, Colby says they're only a 6% acceptance rate. Well, they are in essence, so they are probably more difficult to get into, where you think that that's sort of I'm going to be able to get into that school because I have, my profile fully fits into that school, if not better. But, they're going to have the other, 33% already admit, that have better than you. And so those kids are going to get ahead of you. So do you run a risk by not doing early action or early decision, and going with regular admissions nowadays?
Well, sure. I mean, look, that's the reason you could look at some of these schools. Like, I was just kind of grabbing off the data sources I have, the strong, like the people that really use ED to shape their application process. So if you were to look at a school like, NYU, you might, if you look at these schools in a general way, but their admission studies, say, okay, that's not so bad. But if you don't break this out, I mean, Lehigh admits 73% of the kids that apply ED, but that admit rate probably, I'm guessing, is maybe around 30% for their national global admit rate. So if you were to kind of look at their data and their numbers and say, okay, I'm a reasonable candidate there. But then when you realize, oh, wait a minute, that data, you got to break this out a little bit. Like, who is getting in regular decision? So, are you asking me, do you kind of lose an edge in the regular round? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing is, if you are a family that does not qualify for need-based aid and you don't have, and it's not easy for you to pay $80,000, it's kind of hard to put your chip down on these schools. But you do kind of lose a little bit of an edge. The other question around the ED piece is, do I swing for the fences and apply to Duke? Or do I, play it a little safer and apply to Emory? And I was at Amherst visiting a couple of years ago, and I was just kind of sitting in a pizza parlor, and I heard these two kids talking, and one was saying, you know what, I didn't want to take any chances. I just applied to Amherst early decision. He didn't want to, apply to Dartmouth. He and this, so that's one of the decisions around early decision is, do I swing for the fences, or do I put that chip somewhere safer, somewhere more likely? So, it's a lot to think about. And certainly, some of these schools, like Union College gives merit money and plays the early decision game a little bit. So some of these schools could maybe give you money, but you've kind of showed your hand to them with the ED. Like, they don't need to give you any money. You're locked in. So, so it's frustrating. It probably isn't the answer you want, Maura, right?
That's the answer. That's the answer. I was
That's the
curious about.
answer. I mean, that's why I put this, that's why I thought walking through all these different application plans and what they entail and how it all works is.
It's just interesting because, like, kind of at the beginning of the conversation, you're saying that, the kids and the stress of, both the student and the, parents going through, but it's, these kids, this does add more stress because you have, in essence, really your kids should be applying, to more schools, either in the early action. If they don't have an absolute school they want to go to, well, then you can't do an early decision, unless you're that one kid that you saw in the pizza parlor. But the early action really, it should be the one, you really should be applying fully into early action, because, the regular decision, even if you fit a perfect profile, you can't say that's a target school anymore if you're going into regular decision, because it's not necessarily a target school if you're going to be up against only, 30% of the population that's going to fill that school that following year. And that's tough. That's tough.
Yeah. Are there other questions? Anybody want to ask anything? Well, listen, I'm happy to take any questions by email if anything comes up, or if you have a more specific question to your situation that you want to, ask that isn't maybe, just too specific to your child. So anyway, thank you so much for coming. And I'll have a recording of this if anybody wants it. And please reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you, Louise.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Louise.